So we're going to talk about different types of bonds. This is obviously not a bond. This is Mr. Puffin. Mr. Puffin came from the Danish Design Museum in Copenhagen. And, there's a whole story to tell about him. How he looks like a flask, and how every time I got to a gate, even though he was in my carry-on, I had to open the box, open the bat, take Mr. Puffin out, take Mr. Puffin apart, and let security see that it was simply a puffin. Anyway, Mr. Puffin says goodbye for now. Okay, bond types. We are primarily going to be working with covalent bonds in this chapter, but that's not all there are. And since you don't even know what a covalent bond is, we've got to describe these. So your book talks about ionic bonds first. Ionic bonds are made between metals and nonmetals. And generally what's happening there is the metal will form a cation and the nonmetal will form an anion. We'll talk about how that happens later. But the important thing in an ionic bond is electrons are not shared. The more electronegative atom actually takes an electron from the less electronegative atom. You can think of it as electron thievery, if you would like. But there is a complete transfer of an electron from one element to another. So we have complete electron transfer. Whoops. Complete electron transfer. Sorry about the handwriting. Ionic bonds tend to form high melting point solids. And these high melting point solids can conduct electricity. They can do that if they are molten. Electricity, yes, they conduct electricity. They can do this if they're molten or if they're dissolved in water. It's because the cations and the anions break apart in those conditions. So ionic bonds, nonmetals to metals, high melting point solids, which conduct electricity. The next kind of bond is known as a covalent bond. They are generally nonmetals to nonmetals. Okay, nonmetal to nonmetal. Covalent bonds are the type of bond that I showed you when we did the potential energy well. The electrons are shared. Sometimes evenly in the case of H2, sometimes not so evenly in the case of HF. Covalent compounds will make low melting point solids. Liquids or gases, and they will not conduct electricity no matter what you do to them. They don't conduct electricity no matter what. Covalent bonds can be broken down into two different categories. One is a nonpolar covalent bond. This is where electrons are shared equally or nearly equally. That says shard, it's supposed to say shared. Let's try this again. Our son just walked in with groceries. Electrons are shared evenly. And a polar covalent bond. Where you have unequal electron sharing. The last thing we need to look at is what happens when you form an ionic bond. I'm going to move this up there. Is that okay? Say you have sodium. Okay, so we're making an ionic bond here. Sodium's a metal. You put in some energy. Sodium goes to a sodium +1 cation and a free electron. You've got chlorine. Chlorine picks up sodium's electron and becomes the chloride ion. These two guys, sodium +1 and chlorine -1, come together and they make a bond. And sodium still has a positive charge in the bond. Chlorine has a negative charge in the bond. Chlorine, which is more electronegative, has taken an electron from sodium. Sodium is perfectly happy. It has a noble gas configuration now. So does chlorine. And these guys are bonded. They will bond in huge, huge crystals where you have many sodiums and chlorines on top and on the bottom. And everyone is bonded to 6 other atoms of the opposite type. Okay, that's it for bond types.